Señor, abre mis labios y mi boca proclamará tus alabanzas. Lord, open my lips and my mouth shall proclaim your praise. Amen.
Amen.
Sometimes the gospel sounds like the Pharisees and Jesus are playing gotcha. And they thought that they were going to get Jesus today. So they thought up a question that could possibly trap Jesus into answering something incorrectly. And Jesus' response to them is, you know, if you want to go around setting traps, you've picked on the wrong person. I'm not the kind of person that you can trick that easily. So he goes on to summarize all of the rules and laws that they had, and you have to know that their lives were so centered around rules and laws that's the only way they could relate to each other and to the world. And Jesus is saying, by summarizing the 613 rules and laws that they were haggling over, he eliminates all of that by saying to them, you can sum the whole thing up with two sayings: love God, love your neighbor. And so that really takes the winds out of their sails. So what is it that he's saying? He's saying that relationship is more important than rules and laws. And the relationship that he's talking about gets manifested in love. Love God, love each other. Love is a very powerful truth, reality, feeling, decision. And even though there's many great powers in the world, who felt an earthquake here recently? Anybody? Well, I'm new to the area, so I was at one time counting how many earthquakes I've experienced, but I think I'm losing track because they happen so often. But this last one that happened while I was on the phone with Donna Colombo. So Donna lives maybe a couple of miles from here, and so I was in my office, she was in her home office, and we were talking, and then there was this, jumping up and down. And we kind of stopped for like maybe half a second or something, and then we had to acknowledge to one another that an earthquake had just happened. And we kept bravely going through the conversation, trying to, just keep going. And I said, I think that was an earthquake. And she says, yeah, I think that was. So I've been thinking about that, because then later that evening, Bill and I were in a theater on one of the upper levels, and then another earthquake came, and to me it seemed like it was longer than the first one. So I started thinking about that, about how we were, because Bill was in another part of the city, and he texted me and said, did you feel that? And so Donna and I, within seconds of each other, miles apart, and Bill in another place, and then later we found out that the earthquake was actually in Berkeley, which is about 15 miles from here, and it was like right under Cal, I understand. And further, people in Southern California felt it, and then I heard reports later that as far west as Colorado, some people felt it. So I started thinking about the amount of energy it took for the earth to lift up me, the desk, the building, the ground. I mean, it lifted it. It wasn't just kind of like this. It was more like, a jolt. And so how much energy does it take for the earth to move like that? I mean, in some cases, Bill told me the other day that the biggest earthquake we've ever experienced was somewhere in Ohio, and it actually reversed the flow of the Mississippi. It just changed the flow. That's a lot of power. That's a lot of strength. But compared to the love of God, It is small. God's love is bigger than the power of an earthquake. That was a way for me to try to wrap my head around how important it is. These 613 rules that you keep trying to hit me over the head with, you know, Jesus is saying, that's not what's important. Focus on what's important. What's important is that I love you. What's important is that you love each other. That's what's important. That's what you need to focus on, not all of this, you know, peripheral stuff that's going on. The rules that were created, this 613 rules and laws, were created because people were worried about, you know, how they related to God and protecting God. And once you get into a position to where you're trying to protect God, you're going to justify all kinds of awful things. So Jesus is saying, pay attention to what's really important. There's a wonderful story from early America about the life of a very famous Quaker named Rufus Jones. And he was one of the Quaker movement's greatest thinkers. In his autobiography, he relates an incident that might seem insignificant, but actually was a pivotal moment in his life that probably made him into the great man he became. It turns out that his parents asked him to stay home. I guess maybe he was 12 years old or so that he should pull weeds from the turnip patch. And so he, being a good person that he was, said, sure, Mom and Dad, I'll do that. And so the parents went off to do whatever it was they were doing, and he went into the turnip patch to start pulling weeds. Well, some friends came along and said, oh, the fish are biting, you know, come with us and go fishing, and when we come back, we'll help you weed. And so he agreed, and so he went off. Well, as boys are wont to do, they lost track of time. They were having such a good time fishing and such that they just, you know, lost track of time, and before he knew it, he was coming home in the dark. So his mother is waiting for him at the door, and she's not happy. So he knew he was going to get it, you know, and he had no defense. You know, there was no way to justify, you know, what he had done. So she took him by the hand, and they went into his room, and he expected that he was going to get a whipping, or at least, you know, a good talking to. But she surprised him. He says he calls it a miracle. Maybe she used to hit him or something. She sat him down in a chair, and she knelt next to him, and she proceeded to pray to God. And she said to God, you know, oh God, take this boy of mine and make him the boy and the man that he's designed to be, that you want him to be. Make him responsible and make him grand and great. Help him to grow up, to take his responsibility seriously, because he's a magnificent boy, Lord, and I want him to grow into the man that you've designed him to be. And so she went on praying like this, and then she got up, reached over and kissed him on the cheek and left. Well, he's sitting there and he's like, oh my God, what have I done? So instead of, you know, punishing him or, you know, lashing out, she put him in God's hands and said, help him be the best that he can be. That's creative love. Because rules and law is not enough. Law and rules only tells us what we've done wrong. Love tells us who we can be. So we don't need to get caught up in minutia. We don't need to beat each other over the head with, particularly not with the Bible, and say, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you're going to get punished for this, you're going to get punished for that. What Jesus is saying, what he was trying to get across to the Pharisees, was focus on this all important aspect. It's relationships that are important. If you look at the 10 Commandments, the first part of the 10 Commandments talks about your relationship to God. The last part of the 10 Commandments talk about your relationship to one another. It's about relationships. It's about love. It's not about whether you're right or wrong. Is it more important that you're right or to be in right relationship with God and the people that you love? That's what's important. Jesus is saying, focus on the love. There's another aspect, and I've alluded to it a little bit. The first part was love God. The second part was love your neighbor. Well, you know, we've heard that famous story when Nicodemus says to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? And Jesus doesn't say who, but tells a story, because that's what Jesus does. He tells stories. And he tells the story of the Good Samaritan. Because it's about relationships. It's about how we treat each other, not just in our families, but in our community. So the second part is love your neighbor. There is a very prominent sociologist named Cornel West, and he has a beautiful saying. He says, justice is what love looks like in public. As a community, we show love by being just. Because love seeks abundance where we see scarcity. Love seeks mercy and compassion while we seek judgment. Love asks for forgiveness when we want explanations. God is saying through Jesus that love is that power that you need in your life, that you have in your life, that you can call upon in your life when you're facing the tough times in your life, when you're facing stress, when you're facing illness, when you're facing broken relationships. Love is a power greater than an earthquake. Love is a power that's greater than fear. If you want to try to get somebody to change, you can't change them by insisting on rules and telling them what's right and wrong. The best way to change someone else is for you to change and to love them. To love people into change is the only way that people will change. Because God isn't interested in rules and regulations. God is interested in transformed hearts. And the only way to get a transformed heart is to love. So when you find yourself focusing on rules and laws, stop and ask yourself, is being right more important than being in a loving relationship? Is being right worth broken relationships? Love is a power that Jesus is asking us to focus on beyond all else. Amen.